Okay, gonna be hard to follow that. I'll be reading just a little excerpt from something I've been working on recently. A story that, for a working title, we'll say, "Why don't you try being dead for a little while?" There weren't too many people at the funeral. It was a neutral thought, Elliot supposed, as he hadn't gone to extreme efforts in his life to cast a wide net for a generous audience, and at the same time he wasn't altogether displeased with the turnout. It wouldn't have felt as intimate if they were packed shoulder to shoulder around his grave, shuffling because their feet were uncomfortable. He'd rather they cry spaced at even intervals, so that they could feel just a little bit more alone in the world. Elliot was standing off at a distance, observing the proceedings underneath the shade of a healthy oak. The afternoon sun beat across the ground, heat soaking into the black suits and black dresses of the attendees, and even though he couldn't feel any of the warmth, he still felt that his skin might get sunburnt with too much exposure. He couldn't get melanoma as a ghost, could he? Even without the threat of burning, Elliot felt an awkwardness at attending his own funeral, like it was an egoistic act. He also didn't know how to act, because there weren't too many people he could talk to about this sort of thing. Elliot's body was discovered a few nights before. To anyone else, it would have seemed that he'd suddenly passed away in his sleep. To the doctor performing the autopsy, it seemed that he'd suffered an aneurysm, which made the doctor fear his own mortality and vow to be a better man to his family. To Elliot, it was a wish granted, even if the effects were temporary. The thing had come a few hours before his death, letting itself in through Elliot's bedroom window with spider-like arms wreathed in a tattered black cloak. Even its legs looked like arms, prehensile and unnervingly human, rippling with wrinkles and muscle, yet it had no apparent weight as it left no imprint on the deep pile carpet floor. It introduced itself as a merchant of fine and mysterious wares, emphasis on mysterious. Elliot had a brief moment of panic when the merchant appeared, and he thought for a second he might be killed, inhabited, and his skin worn like a jacket. But the merchant merely assured him that the prices for its goods were not anything nearly as awful as that. All of its wares were free of charge, but they would not remember the encounter once the item was consumed or used, and the merchant would only ever appear once again on their deathbed to claim their soul. Elliot was fine with that, more or less. He didn't think there would be too many people at his funeral anyhow. The merchant swept aside its cloak and revealed an assortment of strange objects that Elliot had no hope of identifying. Some looked archaic, stones carved with complex characters, pieces of old wood tied together with older string, more stones carved with more complex characters, while others seemed to be impossible, lightning in a mason jar, a set of Klein bottles, and canned black hole in olive oil. With one of its many hands, the merchant plucked a single purple pill from the interior of his cloak, for it had the feeling that this was the item that Elliot sought. Elliot agreed, but he also didn't want to argue with the strange entity that intruded into his bedroom and asked for one of the pretty rocks instead. The merchant held out a distended foreign arm and asked Elliot, "Why don't you try being dead for a little while? You might like it." Elliot took the pill from the merchant and he inspected it closely before asking what that meant, but by that point the merchant had already left, and Elliot only managed to catch a glimpse of a long, leathery appendage slinking back out of the window. He looked out, but saw no strange creature, nothing but the same view he'd seen for the last 2 decades. He waited about 3 hours just to make sure that the merchant was really gone, then popped the pill in his mouth, swallowing it with the help of some orange juice. And then Elliot dropped dead, spilling the juice all over the carpeted floor. Thank you.